Minjun had ordered executions for men who arrived 5 minutes late to his table. Yet he sat motionless, a portrait of lethal stillness in tailored Armani black, as his scheduled blind date crossed the 15-minute mark. The Alpha checked his Patek Philippe watch with the detached precision of a man calculating exactly how much disrespect he would tolerate before ending this charade his mother had orchestrated. The room was the crown jewel of his private hotel, soundproofed, guarded by 3 men whose loyalty was purchased in blood, and designed for conversations that left no witnesses. Then the door opened. Yejun Park entered like a deliberate provocation. He moved with controlled grace despite the hour's lateness, dressed in blood-red silk that clung to his lean frame, a color no traditional Omega would dare wear to meet a Mafia Alpha. His appearance screamed expensive desperation, tailored but not custom, polished but not pristine. Dark eyes swept the room with the raw calculation of someone who knew exactly what he was risking by being here. He didn't apologize for his tardiness. Didn't bow or lower his gaze in the deference Omegas typically showed powerful alphas. Instead, he walked directly to Minjun's table, and before sitting, he leaned close to the most dangerous man in Seoul. His voice was barely above a whisper, meant only for Minjun's ears. I have 48 hours before something I love becomes irreversible. Tell me right now, does your mother's payment clear today, or did I waste my last chance coming here to play dress up? Minjun didn't move. His hand remained steady near his untouched glass of whiskey, but something shifted behind his eyes. This Omega hadn't asked for jewelry, status, or even a courtship. He'd asked for the transaction to be expedited. And he wore scent blockers so industrial grade that Minjun couldn't catch even a trace of what should be an overwhelming biological signal. Interesting. My mother arranged $50,000, Minjun said, voice cold as winter steel. Transfer scheduled for week's end. He paused, studying the stranger who'd just walked into his world wearing defiance like armor. But since you're operating on a deadline. He reached into his jacket, retrieving a checkbook that could solve most people's problems with a single signature. Yejun slid into the chair opposite Minjun with the controlled movements of someone who'd practiced appearing confident when everything inside was screaming. The blood-red silk shirt he wore was deliberate, a conscious rejection of the soft pastels and yielding fabric society expected Omegas to drape themselves in when meeting powerful alphas. It caught the low amber light of the restaurant like a warning. He didn't wait for Minjun to speak first. Didn't engage in the careful dance of pleasantries that typically opened these arranged encounters. I received your mother's proposal through the matchmaker, Yejun said, voice low and precise. 2 weeks as your public partner. $50,000. He met Minjun's eyes directly, another small act of defiance in a world where Omegas were taught to lower their gaze. I need to confirm the payment structure. Installments or lump sum? And what exactly constitutes public partner? Minjun studied him with the same cold assessment he usually reserved for business rivals across negotiating tables. Most Omegas who entered his world arrived perfumed and yielding, weaponizing their biology with practiced precision, a flutter of eyelashes, a strategic failure of scent blockers, the subtle tilt of a neck to expose the bonding gland. Calculated seduction wrapped in the pretense of innocent attraction. This one wore scent blockers so industrial grade that Minjun couldn't detect even a whisper of his natural scent. And he spoke like he was negotiating a corporate merger, not a courtship. You're direct, Minjun observed, his tone neutral but his mind already recalculating. His mother had promised him someone different this time. He'd assumed that meant different packaging on the same desperate social climber. I'm desperate, Yejun corrected without shame, shoulders tense but voice steady. But desperation doesn't mean I'll accept disrespect or ambiguity. If this is some kind of game, a way to humiliate someone beneath your status for entertainment, I'd rather you tell me now so I can leave and find another option. The challenge hung between them like drawn steel. Minjun felt his alpha instinct stir, not at submission or the promise of biological compatibility, but at the sheer audacity of an Omega who sat across from Seoul's most feared Mafia boss and demanded to be treated as an equal. Who wore defiance like the red silk clinging to his frame. One of his guards shifted near the door. Minjun raised a single finger without looking away from Yejun, and the man went still. The arrangement is straightforward, Minjun said. You attend 4 public events with me over 2 weeks. Charity galas, business dinners, functions where my mother believes I need to appear settled and respectable. You play the role of someone I'm seriously considering. In exchange, $50,000 transfers to your account at the conclusion of our agreement. Lump sum, Yejun confirmed. Not contingent on your mother's approval or my performance meeting subjective standards. Lump sum, Minjun agreed. Contingent only on your attendance and discretion. And the public partner role, Yejun's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Does it extend to private expectations? Ah. There it was. The real question beneath the clinical negotiation. No, Minjun said flatly. I'm not interested in purchasing intimacy. This is theater for my mother's peace of mind, nothing more. Some of the tension bled from Yejun's shoulders, though his expression remained guarded. Why do you need the money? Minjun asked, genuine curiosity breaking through his usual detachment. Most people in desperate situations came with rehearsed sob stories. This Omega had offered nothing but terms. That's not part of our arrangement, Yejun replied, meeting his gaze with that same unflinching directness. I perform the role you need. You provide the payment we agreed on. My reasons are mine. The rejection was clean, professional, and somehow more intriguing than any answer he could have given. Minjun leaned back in his chair, reassessing the man across from him. When can you start? Tonight, if necessary, Yejun said. I cleared my schedule for 2 weeks the moment I accepted this meeting. Efficient. Motivated. Yejun's slight smile held no warmth, only grim determination. There's a difference. Minjun reached into his jacket with the casual precision of a man who'd solved countless problems with money. The checkbook he withdrew was leather-bound, discreet, the kind of accessory that whispered wealth rather than shouted it. He uncapped his Mont Blanc pen with a soft click that sounded unnaturally loud in the private dining room. Let's simplify this, he said, already writing. I'll write you a check for $75,000. You can leave now, avoid the inconvenience of pretending to tolerate my company for 2 weeks. We both save time. It was a power move he'd executed dozens of times, the swift, clean amputation of uncomfortable situations. Pay more than asked, end the complication, move on. Most people took the offer before the ink dried. He expected gratitude. Perhaps even that telltale flutter of Omega relief, the biological urge to accept an alpha's provision, the instinct that supposedly made Omegas naturally inclined toward dependence. Instead, Yejun's entire body went rigid. His jaw tightened, and something dangerous flashed in his dark eyes. No. Minjun's pen paused mid-signature. Excuse me? I said no. Yejun's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a man drawing a line in concrete. His eyes held something Minjun recognized from his own mirror, flinty pride that would rather shatter than bend. I don't accept charity. I don't care if you're an alpha, a mafia boss, or the king of Seoul. I came here to earn what I need, not to be paid off like an inconvenient problem you can make disappear with extra money. The rejection landed like a slap. Minjun set down the pen slowly, his expression unreadable. Most Omegas would take the money and run. I'm not most Omegas, Yejun said, each word deliberate and edged with something that might have been anger or might have been pain. And if you think my designation means I have no dignity, that I should be grateful for your scraps and your dismissal, then this conversation is over. He started to stand. The movement triggered something in Minjun, not alpha instinct, but genuine surprise. In his world, everyone had a price. Everyone could be bought, dismissed, or controlled. This man was desperate enough to negotiate with a criminal, but too proud to accept more money for less work. It made no sense. It was inefficient, illogical. It was fascinating. Sit down, Minjun said. Not a command, but not quite a request. Yejun remained standing, one hand on the back of his chair. Waiting. The silence stretched between them like a test neither wanted to fail. Then Minjun did something he rarely did, he smiled. A genuine expression, sharp and appreciative, that made his guard shift nervously near the door. 2 weeks, he said, closing the checkbook. $50,000. You'll attend 4 public events with me and stay in my secondary residence for appearances. Non-negotiable terms. You maintain the illusion convincingly, you follow my security team's protocols without argument, and, he paused, studying Yejun with renewed interest, you tell me why you need the money. Yejun's hand tightened on the chair. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he slowly sat back down, that rigid pride still evident in every line of his body. My brother, he said finally, voice carefully controlled. Junho. He's 17. He needs surgery, experimental procedure for a congenital heart defect. 50,000 covers the hospital deposit. The surgery is scheduled in 3 weeks if I can secure the funds. And if you can't? Yejun's eyes met his, dark and haunted. Then my brother dies waiting for a miracle that never comes. Yejun refused the car waiting outside the hotel, a gleaming black Mercedes with tinted windows and a driver who looked more like a soldier than hired help. If I'm going to pretend to be someone you'd actually choose, Yejun said, already walking toward the subway entrance, you need to see how I live. How real people in Seoul survive. Minjun stared at him, then at his head of security, who looked equally baffled. The high-fashion ghost, Seoul's underground nickname for the alpha who traveled exclusively in armored vehicles and never touched public infrastructure, was being led toward the subway at evening rush hour. His security chief opened his mouth to protest. Minjun raised a hand, silencing him. Follow at a distance. Don't interfere unless there's actual danger. So Minjun found himself descending into the fluorescent-lit chaos of Seoul's subway system, pressed against bodies that didn't know or care who he was. The air was thick and recycled, carrying the mingled scents of 100 different people, sweat, perfume, street food, and the general exhaustion of working-class Seoul at the end of a long day. Yejun moved through it with practiced efficiency, one hand gripping the overhead rail, the other protecting the small backpack slung over his shoulder. He didn't flinch when the train lurched or when a businessman's elbow jabbed his ribs. This was his world, navigated daily, understood intimately. They emerged in a market district that Minjun recognized from property documents. He owned 3 buildings here through shell corporations. He'd never visited. The contrast was immediate and visceral. Where Minjun's world was climate-controlled silence and curated luxury, this was raw commerce, vendors shouting prices, the smell of grilled meat mixing with fish and incense, stalls selling everything from counterfeit designer bags to fresh vegetables still dirty from the field. Yejun navigated the maze with the confidence of someone who knew every shortcut and trusted vendor. He stopped to bargain in rapid Korean with an elderly woman selling fruit, his tone warm and familiar. She called him by name, asked about Junho. This is where I buy Junho's medication, Yejun explained, stopping at a narrow stall wedged between a fish vendor and a phone repair shop. Hand-lettered signs advertised generic pharmaceuticals at prices well below retail. The pharmacist was an elderly woman with kind eyes and hands marked by decades of work. She recognized Yejun immediately, her expression softening. Yejun requested 2 bottles of medication, counting out exact change. The woman filled the order, then added a 3rd bottle, waving away his attempt to pay. For the boy, she said gently in Korean. Tell him Mrs. Kim wishes him strength. Yejun's composure cracked, just for a moment. His thank you was barely audible. And in that moment of vulnerability, his scent blockers flickered. Minjun caught it, orange blossom and rain, clean and sharp, underlaid with something harder, the metallic edge of survival, of pride forged under pressure. Not the cloying sweetness of traditional omega scents designed to attract and soothe. This was honest, complex, real. It was gone in a breath as Yejun's control reasserted itself. They walked away from the stall in silence. Finally, Minjun spoke. "Your brother is lucky," he said quietly, "to have you." Yejun's voice came out tight, controlled. "Luck has nothing to do with it. Luck would be having parents who didn't die drowning in medical debt. Luck would be living in a world where omegas can earn what alphas and betas earn for the same work. Where designation doesn't determine your ceiling." He stopped, turned to face Minjun directly. "I don't have luck, Mr. Choi. I have stubbornness. And a brother who deserves to live long enough to see a world better than this one." Namsan Park at twilight offered something rare in Seoul: relative privacy. Away from the surveillance cameras that blanketed the city's commercial districts and the crowds that made anonymity impossible, the walking paths near the observatory provided space to breathe. Yejun led Minjun to a bench overlooking the city lights beginning to flicker to life below. For a long moment, he simply stared at the sprawling urban landscape, hands clasped between his knees. Then he pulled out his phone. "You asked why I need the money," Yejun said quietly. "This is why." He turned the screen toward Minjun. The photograph showed a teenage boy with Yejun's distinctive dark eyes and sharp cheekbones, though his face was softer, younger, still holding the last remnants of childhood. He wore a hospital gown and was smiling at the camera despite the 4 lines threading into both arms and the monitoring equipment visible in the background. The smile was genuine, brave and heartbreaking in equal measure. "Junho," Yejun said, his voice carefully controlled, each word measured. 17. Congenital heart defect, diagnosed when he was 9. He's been on the transplant list for 2 years, but compatible hearts for his blood type are rare. We've been waiting." "And the surgery?" Minjun asked, studying the photograph, seeing the family resemblance not just in features but in that same stubborn tilt of the chin. "New procedure. Experimental, uses a combination of mechanical assist and tissue engineering to reinforce the existing heart while they wait for transplant." Yejun's thumb traced the edge of his phone screen, an unconscious gesture of tenderness. "Korean and American collaboration, only available at 3 hospitals worldwide. Asen Medical Center is one of them. Success rate: 87% for patients in Junho's age range and condition severity." The statistics came quickly, clearly memorized through repeated research. "The surgery is scheduled for 3 weeks from now, if I can make the $50,000 deposit. Without it, his slot goes to the next patient on the list." "And if you can't make the deposit?" Minjun asked, though he already knew the answer from the tightness in Yejun's shoulders. "He waits." Yejun's voice remained controlled, but something cracked beneath the surface. "And his heart gets weaker. The doctors say he has maybe 18 months at current deterioration rate before he needs full transplant or..." His voice broke entirely. He turned away sharply, hands clenched into fists on his knees. "I won't let that happen. I can't." Minjun felt an unfamiliar urge rise in his chest, not the alpha instinct to protect an omega, not biological imperative, but something more fundamentally human. The desire to comfort someone in pain simply because they were hurting. "Why not ask for help?" he said carefully. "There are medical charities, fundraising platforms, organizations that specialize in cases like this. I've tried everything." Yejun's laugh was bitter, hollow. "Every charity, every foundation, every goddamn crowdfunding site on the internet. You know what they want? Deserving cases with perfect stories. Photogenic families with tragic but sympathetic circumstances." He turned back to face Minjun, eyes bright with unshed tears and fury. 2 omegas from America, parents dead from medical debt, no extended family, no community ties? We're statistics, not sympathetic. The charities see too many cases like ours. We're not special enough to save. And I won't," his voice shook, "I won't let Junho be reduced to a charity case that gets passed over because our story isn't compelling enough." So you came to a blind date with a mafia boss, Minjun said softly. I came to a transaction with a man who has the money I need and a practical reason to pay it. Yejun met his gaze directly, that flinty pride reasserting itself even through the emotional vulnerability. I'm not expecting rescue, Mr. Choi. I'm not asking you to save me or my brother out of the goodness of your heart. I'm offering a service, 2 weeks of convincing performance, and my brother lives. That's fair. That's equal. The distinction landed with perfect clarity. This Omega wasn't asking to be saved. He was demanding to be treated as an equal partner in his own survival, refusing to accept help that came wrapped in pity or obligation or the assumption that his desperation made him powerless. Minjun looked at the photograph again, then at Yejun's fierce, protective expression. Your brother is fortunate, he said finally, to have someone willing to negotiate with the devil for him. I'd negotiate with worse than you, Yejun replied quietly, if it meant he lived. Mrs. Choi arrived at Minjun's secondary residence unannounced on the 4th day of the arrangement, a power move only a mother could execute without fear of consequences. She bypassed the security checkpoint with the imperious wave of someone who'd funded the entire operation and found Yejun alone in the kitchen. He was preparing food with the kind of efficiency that spoke of years making limited ingredient stretch. Simple rice, vegetables chopped with professional precision, a modest portion of fish being seasoned with careful economy. Nothing wasted. Every movement purposeful. You're not what I expected, Mrs. Choi said in Korean, studying him from the doorway. Yejun straightened immediately, turning to face her. He didn't bow or avert his gaze, habits that would have been automatic for most Omegas meeting the matriarch of the Choi family. Instead, he met her eyes with the same direct respect he'd shown Minjun. With respect, Mrs. Choi, he replied in equally fluent Korean, your son wasn't what I expected either. The corner of her mouth twitched. Then she laughed, a sharp, genuinely delighted sound that transformed her severe features into something warm and approving. You have fire, she said, switching to English as she moved into the kitchen, claiming space with the confidence of someone who owned it. Good. Minjun has forgotten what it means to burn for something real. Yejun returned to his cooking, though his shoulders remained tense. I'm sure your son burns for many things. His empire, for instance. His empire is survival, not passion. Mrs. Choi leaned against the counter, watching Yejun's hands move with practiced skill. When he was young, before the B-clan, before all this, he had principles. He wanted to be a prosecutor, can you imagine? He believed in justice, in systems that protected the weak. She paused, something melancholy crossing her features. Then his father died. Murdered by a rival who thought the Choi family would crumble without its patriarch. Minjun was 22. He had a choice, let his father's death destroy everything, or become something harder than his enemies. He chose survival, Yejun said quietly, plating the fish. He traded his soul for an empire, Mrs. Choi corrected. And has been surviving ever since. Existing, but not living. Do you understand the difference? Yejun turned to face her fully. Why are you telling me this? Mrs. Choi's eyes were shrewd, assessing him with the same analytical precision her son possessed. Because I see in you what my son used to have, pride that refuses to be bought. Principles that won't bend even when breaking would be easier. She gestured toward the simple meal. You cook like someone who's known real hunger. You negotiate like someone who understands their worth despite a world that tries to diminish it. You refuse charity even when accepting would solve your problems. I'm here for a transaction, Yejun said carefully. 2 weeks, $50,000. That's all. He thinks this is a transaction too, Mrs. Choi said softly. But I know my son. I've watched him manipulate, dismiss, and discard everyone who's ever tried to get close to him. Alphas, betas, omegas, designation doesn't matter. They are all either assets or threats in his calculation. She stepped closer, voice dropping. But has never looked at anyone, not once in 10 years, the way he looks at you. Like you're a puzzle he can't solve with money or violence. Like you're something he wants to understand rather than control. Yejun's scent blockers flickered. Just for a moment, orange blossom and rain filled the small kitchen before his iron control reasserted itself. I'm not here to fix him, Yejun said firmly, meeting her eyes. I'm not some redemption arc or catalyst for change. I'm a man trying to save his brother. That's all. No, Mrs. Choi agreed, something like approval in her smile. You're not here to fix him. But perhaps, she moved toward the door, pausing in the threshold, you'll remind him what it means to choose something beyond mere survival. To want something, not because it's strategic, but because it matters. She left as abruptly as she'd arrived, leaving Yejun alone with cooling fish and the uncomfortable weight of expectations he'd never agreed to carry. Park Hong was everything Minjun wasn't, and took pride in the distinction. Where Minjun treated his alpha designation as merely another business tool, Hong weaponized it with deliberate cruelty. He built his empire on the assumption that omegas existed as commodities to be acquired, exploited, or discarded when they lost value. His reputation in Seoul's underground was built on broken bonds and destroyed lives. He'd been circling the B-Clan's harbor contracts for 8 months, probing for weakness, searching for leverage that would force Minjun to yield the most lucrative shipping route in Southeast Asia. Direct confrontation was suicide. Minjun's empire was too fortified, too ruthlessly efficient. But everyone had vulnerabilities. Everyone. Hong found his in a trail of phone records, intercepted through a corrupt telecommunications executive who owed him favors. The records painted a portrait of desperation, repeated calls to Asen Medical Center, frantic inquiries about payment plans and surgery schedules, a medical ID number that led to a 17-year-old Omega boy with weeks to live without intervention. And all those calls traced back to Yejun Park, the unknown Omega currently playing the role of Minjun Choi's partner. Perfect. The message arrived on Yejun's phone during the charity gala's cocktail hour, an event for Seoul's elite to pretend their wealth came with social conscience. Yejun was standing beside Minjun, nursing champagne he hadn't touched, playing his role with convincing ease. Then his phone buzzed. Your brother's debt is interesting. $250,000 total. I can make it disappear, if Minjun withdraws from the harbor deal. You have 48 hours. PH. The blood drained from Yejun's face. His hands began to shake, the champagne flute trembling audibly against his fingers. Minjun noticed immediately. His conversational smile with a business associate didn't falter, but his attention shifted entirely. What is it? He asked, voice low enough only Yejun could hear. Nothing. Yejun's voice came out strained, artificial. Just, I need air. He turned toward the balcony doors, movements too quick, too desperate to be casual. Minjun excused himself mid-sentence and followed. The balcony overlooked Seoul's glittering skyline, cool night air a sharp contrast to the gala's stifling warmth. Yejun gripped the railing with white-knuckled intensity, his chest rising and falling in barely controlled breaths. His scent blockers failed completely. Orange blossom and rain flooded the space, but now it was corrupted, mixed with the acrid chemical smell of pure fear, of panic barely contained. Tell me, Minjun commanded, then caught himself. Softer, almost gentle, please. Yejun's hand shook as he held out his phone. Minjun read the message once. Twice. His expression transformed, the urbane businessman vanishing, replaced by something cold and lethal that reminded everyone why he ruled Seoul's underworld. Park Hong, he said quietly, voice like winter steel. He's threatening you to get to me. Using your brother as leverage. Yejun's laugh was broken, hollow. The harbor contracts, they're worth millions, aren't they? His voice sounded distant, detached. Tens of millions, probably. More than one sick kid's life. More than. Don't. Minjun gripped his shoulders, forcing Yejun to face him. Don't make that calculation. Why not? Yejun's eyes were fierce with unshed tears, shining in the city lights. It's the truth, isn't it? I'm nobody. Some desperate omega you hired for theater. Junho is nobody, just another sick kid in a system that doesn't care. Your empire, your contracts, they matter more than. You matter to me, Minjun interrupted. The words hung between them, raw and unexpected and utterly sincere. Yejun stared at him, breath caught. What? You matter to me, Minjun repeated, each word deliberate. Hong made a fatal miscalculation. He thought you were expendable. He was wrong. Yejun disappeared for 6 hours. Minjun's security team tore through Seoul with the controlled panic of men who understood what failure meant to their boss. They tracked his phone to Asen Medical Center and found him in the pediatric cardiac ward, sitting in a chair beside a hospital bed, holding his sleeping brother's hand. Junho looked smaller than in the photograph, thinner, paler, with dark circles under his closed eyes that spoke of pain managed but never absent. Medical equipment surrounded him like a fortress of failing hope, each beep and hiss a reminder of borrowed time. Yejun didn't look up when Minjun entered. Just kept staring at his brother's face, thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of Junho's hand. I came to say goodbye, Yejun said quietly, voice eerily calm. I'm going back to Atlanta tomorrow morning. Without the money. I wanted to tell him in person, even if he can't hear me. Minjun's chest tightened. You're giving up. I'm choosing loyalty over survival. Yejun finally looked up, and his eyes were clear despite the devastation written across his features. He stood carefully, releasing Junho's hand with visible reluctance. Hong wants me to betray you. To force you to give up something you've built, something that matters. I won't do it. Not even for Junho. That's insane. Is it? Yejun's smile was broken and proud in equal measure, a razor blade wrapped in grief. You showed me soul through your eyes these past days. Took me to places you'd never been, listened to my story without judgment, treated me like an equal when everyone else sees an omega to be used or protected or pitted. He moved toward Minjun, each step measured and final. You could have dismissed me after that first dinner. Written a bigger check and made me disappear. But you didn't. You chose to see me as a person, not a designation or a problem to solve. I won't repay that with betrayal. Minjun stared at him, something fundamental shifting in his understanding of the man before him. Your brother could die. I know. Yejun's voice cracked, the careful control finally splintering. God, I know. But I'll find another way. I always do. I'll work triple shifts, I'll sell everything, He stopped, shoulders shaking. What I won't do is become the person Hong thinks I am. The desperate omega who'll sacrifice anything, anyone, for money. Who has no principles beyond survival. He picked up the small backpack beside the chair, everything he owned in Seoul, apparently. Thank you for 2 weeks of actually seeing me. Really seeing me. Not my designation, not my desperation. Just, me. He walked toward the door, past Minjun, each step deliberate despite the tears now streaming silently down his face. Minjun let him reach the threshold. Then. I'm not letting you walk away. Yejun stopped, hand on the doorframe. You don't get a choice in this. It's my decision. Neither do you, Minjun interrupted, his voice steel wrapped in silk. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides. Because I'm not letting Hong win. And I'm not losing you. Yejun turned, confusion and hope warring on his face. What are you? You chose loyalty when it would have been easier to betray me, Minjun said, each word precise and weighted with meaning. You chose principles over your brother's life, the most impossible choice anyone could face. Do you really think I'm going to let that sacrifice stand? The harbor contracts are mine to keep or give away, Minjun said. But Hong made a critical error. He assumed I follow the same logic as him, that everything has a price, that people are commodities to be traded. He was wrong. He stepped closer, invading Yejun's space with deliberate intent. You're not a transaction anymore. And I don't lose what's mine. The abandoned warehouse in Incheon sat on the edge of the industrial waterfront, rusted metal and broken windows, a place where bodies could disappear without questions. Hong's choice of location was deliberate: neutral territory, no surveillance, no witnesses. Minjun arrived alone at midnight, exactly as demanded. He walked through the massive loading bay doors with his hands visible, dressed in a simple black coat that concealed nothing, no security detail flanking him. The picture of an alpha who'd been backed into a corner and forced to choose between his empire and something he valued more. Hong was waiting in the center of the warehouse floor, flanked by 6 massive alphas whose reputations were built on violence. They formed a semicircle of threat, guns holstered but visible, postures radiating the promise of pain. "Choi," Hong said, voice dripping with satisfaction. "I was beginning to think you'd choose your little Omega's brother over business. That would have been disappointing." Minjun stopped 10 feet away, expression carefully neutral. "The harbor contracts," he said flatly. "I'll sign them over tonight. In exchange, you erase Junho Park's medical debt completely and leave Yejun alone. Forever." Hong's smile was predatory, triumphant. "Those are my terms exactly. I'm pleased you're being reasonable about this." He gestured dismissively. "Bring the contracts." Minjun reached into his coat with deliberate slowness. Hong's men tensed, hands moving toward weapons, but relaxed when Minjun withdrew only a folder of documents. He stepped forward, extending them. Hong reached for the contracts. And froze. Red laser sights appeared on every one of his men's chests simultaneously. Minjun's security team emerged from the shadows like ghosts materializing. 12 armed operatives who'd been concealed in the warehouse's structural blind spots, weapons trained with lethal precision. Hong's hand hovered over the folder, understanding and rage flooding his features. "Did you really think," Minjun said conversationally, his neutral expression dissolving into something cold and amused, "that I'd come unprepared? That I'd sacrifice my empire for one person, no matter how much they matter to me? Then why?" Hong's voice shook with barely contained fury. "Because I wanted you to feel confident," Minjun interrupted, his smile colder than winter. "To believe you'd won. To drop your guard and reveal exactly how you intended to leverage this situation." He withdrew the folder Hong hadn't quite touched. "These contracts you were reaching for? Forgeries. Very good ones, but forgeries nonetheless." He pulled out his phone, turned the screen toward Hong. "The real harbor deal closed this morning at dawn, with partners in Singapore who know better than to threaten what's mine. The contracts are signed, sealed, and completely beyond your reach." Hong's face contorted, moving through shock to rage to calculation. "You're bluffing. Those deals take months to finalize under normal circumstances," Minjun agreed. "But I'm very motivated when someone threatens my people. And I have resources you can't imagine." He stepped closer, voice dropping to something lethal and personal. "You made a critical error, Hong. You assumed Yejun was a weakness. Is not. Is a line you crossed. You can't do this." "I already did." Minjun nodded to his head of security. "Mr. Hong is leaving Seoul tonight. His assets here will be liquidated and distributed to his victims, particularly the Omegas he's trafficked and exploited over the years. Any attempt to return to this city will be met with immediate and permanent consequences." He leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "You're done in Seoul. Leave by morning, or I'll make sure you leave in pieces. And unlike you, I don't make empty threats." Hong's men were already being disarmed, stripped of weapons and communications devices with efficient brutality. Hong himself stood frozen, watching his power evaporate. "This isn't over," he snarled. Yes, Minjun said simply. It is. Minjun found Yejun at the market pharmacy 3 days later, in the same stall where they'd stood together what felt like a lifetime ago. Yejun was bargaining with Mrs. Kim for Junho's medication, counting out exact change with the meticulous care of someone for whom everyone mattered. Minjun waited in the shadows until the transaction finished, watching Yejun accept the small paper bag with quiet gratitude. Then he stepped forward. It's done, he said quietly. Yejun turned, wariness and hope warring in his expression. What's done? Hong is gone. Left Seoul last night on a flight to Manila. The threat is eliminated. Minjun paused, reaching into his coat. And I bought something else. He handed Yejun a leather folder. Yejun opened it with trembling hands. Inside were transfer documents, corporate acquisition papers, legal filings dense with terminology. But certain phrases stood out with crystalline clarity: complete debt portfolio acquisition, ASIN Medical Center Consortium, all patient financial obligations. You? Yejun's voice failed. He looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. What did you do? I bought the root of the problem, Minjun explained, voice steady despite the magnitude of what he'd done. As of this morning, I own the medical debt system that was being used against you. Every patient debt in the hospital consortium that includes ASIN Medical Center. Every payment plan, every financial obligation. He stepped closer. Junho's surgery is scheduled for next week. Fully funded. Zero debt. And when he recovers, there will be no bills waiting. No collections. No threats. Yejun's legs buckled. Minjun caught him, arms strong and sure, holding him steady as the weight of 2 weeks, 2 years, of desperate fear finally lifted. Why? Yejun whispered against Minjun's chest, voice breaking. The money, the power play, this must have cost. Because you chose loyalty over survival, Minjun said, one hand coming up to cup the back of Yejun's head with unexpected gentleness. Because you refused to let desperation make you betray your principles. Because you were willing to walk away from everything you needed rather than become the person Hong assumed you were. He pulled back slightly, enough to meet Yejun's eyes. Because in 2 weeks, you've shown me something I'd forgotten, that some things matter more than empires. More than contracts and territory and power. Yejun stared at him, tears streaming freely now. I don't understand. I'm not asking because you're an omega and I'm an alpha, Minjun said, each word deliberate and weighted with meaning. I'm not asking because of biology or scent compatibility or instinct. I'm asking because I choose you, Yejun Park. Because you challenged every assumption I had about what matters. Because you saw me as more than the high-fashion ghost, and I see you as more than your designation or your desperation. He cupped Yejun's face gently, thumbs brushing away tears, giving him every opportunity to pull away. Do you choose me? Yejun's scent blockers failed completely, not from stress or fear, but from surrender. Orange blossom and rain flooded the narrow market aisle, but now it was mixed with something warm and trusting, something that spoke of hope instead of survival. Yes, Yejun breathed, voice raw and honest. God help me, yes. Their kiss was not gentle. It was fierce and claiming, born not of biological imperative but of conscious choice, two men who'd found in each other not completion, but recognition. Equal. Necessary. Chosen. Behind them, the market continued its chaotic symphony, vendors shouting prices, customers bargaining, the pulse of souls working hard. Mrs. Kim watched from her pharmacy stall, smiling. But for Yejun and Minjun, the world had finally, irrevocably, shifted. Not because of designation or destiny, but because they'd chosen each other when walking away would have been easier. And that choice made all the difference.